Hello, I'm Chris Platt, and I would normally start a video like this by saying you've probably seen me around school, but given the past 12 months and the fact that I've barely been in school, you may not have. I'm a speech and language therapist. I have been for years and years, since the 1800s or something, and I've worked at Fareham Academy 1 day a week for about the last 6 or 7 years. And Alex Lowe has asked me to put together a very quick video to highlight some of the key strategies for supporting students with SLCN in class. And I think that this video is going to dovetail with some training from Peter Harris, the teacher of the deaf as well. And I expect there'll be some overlap between what I'm saying and what he says. So I apologise if any of this is repetitive. I suppose the first thing to do is just to quickly define that term SLCN. So this is an umbrella term for pupils with speech, language and communication needs. And those pupils may have a specific diagnosis, maybe hearing impairment or autism, but often there is no other diagnosis. And often these pupils, these students aren't even recognised. We know that children with SLCN are unidentified, so under-identified, sorry, as a group, and that's particularly the case at secondary school. Because SLCN is not something that is rare or exotic or that only occurs alongside hearing impairment or cleft palate. SLCN is common. You can expect that in an average classroom there will be about 2 pupils at least with SLCN. That doesn't mean they've been recognised or identified as having SLCN, and it may be the case that they've been miscoded. And we know that happens particularly at secondary again, that pupils with SLCN may be miscoded as having a specific learning difficulty or more general learning difficulties. But I suppose the main point is you will almost certainly have 1 or more pupils with SLCN in every class that you teach. And we know that SLCN can have a huge impact academically, but also socially in terms of forming, maintaining friendships, negotiating, problem solving, and also in terms of mental health. On the flip side, we also know that good support within the classroom is incredibly helpful for these students, and the single best way to improve outcomes for pupils with SLCN is through robust quality first teaching. Now, there are many strategies, many interventions for supporting pupils with SLCN, for example, pre-teaching, which can be incredibly useful, say for vocabulary. But in this video, I'm going to focus on 5 key strategies, and they're all ones that happen within the classroom. They are also ones that can be implemented immediately. You can watch this and go and put them into practice. They are also all strategies that will benefit all pupils in your classroom, not only those with SLCN. They're strategies that are known from the research to support pupils with SLCN, and perhaps most importantly, they're strategies that I know from my work with secondary students with SLCN that they themselves have said they find valuable and helpful. So strategy number 1 is giving pupils time, giving them thinking time. Now, I'm sure you've heard this before, but the statistics are really telling on this. A famous study, it's quite old, but I would expect it to still largely hold today, found that on average, teachers gave less than 1 second for their pupils to answer a question. And if it hadn't been answered within a second, then the teacher would either answer that themselves or they would select a pupil to answer. Now, let's just take a moment to think through all the processes that have to happen if you want pupils to answer a question, make a suggestion, to respond, to volunteer an opinion. So firstly, they have to process the language that they've heard. They have to understand the vocabulary, understand the grammar, and understand the speaker's intent, for example, whether they're being sarcastic. Secondly, they need to formulate their own ideas. And thirdly, they need to then find the language, the vocabulary, the grammar to explain their ideas. And finally, they need to put those ideas into words. That takes time, particularly to do it well. And when there is no time, three things tend to happen. So one is that subconsciously, as a teacher, it encourages asking closed questions, questions with a narrowed down choice, questions that can be answered quickly, give a quick response, a short response. Secondly, students who are capable of answering questions focus on that. They focus on answering a question, not the quality of their answer, not the quality of their contribution. They want to be selected. They want to be first. They want to be the one with their hand up. So their pressure is on time, being quick, not a quality response. And thirdly, students with SLCN, or perhaps simply those students who don't have the confidence to have their hand up first or call out first, those students may not even get on the field to try and answer. So giving pupils time will benefit everybody in the classroom, and that includes you as a teacher, because it means that opportunity there is there to ask more open questions, questions that demand a more thoughtful response, a deeper response. Now, there are different ways of providing time. One way is simply to count to 10 before you want a question answered, or a response, or an opinion, or a suggestion. That can feel unnatural at first, but it is very effective. Personally, I would explain to your students what you're doing and why you're doing it. So explain that you want them all to have thinking time. Explain that you want the best quality answer they can come up with. So you don't want anybody putting their hand up or calling out for 10 seconds or until you've said it's okay. So then the pupils understand what that's about, what the pausing is about. An alternative is to ask a question, ask for an opinion, ask for suggestions, but ask people to just think to themselves, maybe doodle or jot some notes down, and then you'll come back in a minute or two and look for answers then. And a third idea is to allow pupils to talk through a question or a statement that you want comments on as a pair or in a small group, and they then feed that back to the classroom. And that takes me neatly onto my second strategy, which is encouraging purposeful talk within the classroom. So peer-to-peer talk, small group talk. And I know this is something that happens in a lot of classrooms already. And it's something that many of the students I work with say they find really valuable, really helpful, to have that opportunity to discuss their learning, to discuss what they need to do in a pair or in small groups with peers. So a lot of schools that focus on oracy, so developing spoken language within the classroom, they will ensure that they have a talk task in every single lesson. So perhaps the teacher will provide some initial teacher input, and pupils then discuss that themselves, debate it between themselves, and then they go and do that piece of writing, or start that science experiment, or begin that project, or attempt that maths problem. So within looking at this peer-to-peer talk, you can experiment. So maybe pairs, that's the common model, is to talking partners, talk to your partner. Maybe pairs do work well, but maybe trios work better in some situations. The important point is you want the talk to be purposeful. You want it to be structured. So that means it needs to be planned. So maybe there are written discussion points or sentence starters or questions to consider. Maybe also think about the groups. Think carefully about which students you put together. Maybe assign students within a group different discussion roles. So one student might be the summariser, who has to summarise the input or summarise what they have to do. Another student might be the clarifier, who questions that, who checks that, we're sure we're understanding that. Another student might be the prober, so somebody who looks for deeper understanding, asks those questions, asks for evidence. Providing opportunities for talk within the classroom is also helpful from a support perspective, because if you have groups talking about a task, talking about their learning, then the teacher or a teaching assistant can sometimes participate in some of those groups. Not to take over, but to listen, to clarify, to fill in any gaps, to check on pupils' understanding. A really good place, if you want to know more about developing oracy within the classroom, is Voice 21. That's Voice 21. They are the National Oracy Charity. If you Google them, there is a wealth of information on their website. My third key strategy will again be something that you will already be utilising within the classroom. It's to use visual support. And so that might be a diagram or a picture or a mind map. It may be an example. Examples are incredibly helpful. But what's also important is to present a non-example. So this is what we want to see, and this is what we don't want to see. Because good models demonstrate what works, but they also demonstrate what doesn't work. Video, of course, can be very useful, but do be mindful of the language within videos. The language can be very complex, can be very fast. So it's important to not think that a student with SLCN has understood the content, has understood what to do just because they've seen a video about it. And thinking about understanding, my fourth strategy is ensuring that pupils have the opportunity and the encouragement and the skills to clarify, to question, to check on their learning. Now, there are different approaches to this. I know a common approach is the 3 before me approach, to kind of encourage independence with that. So firstly use your brain, try and work it out, then maybe look in a book or a dictionary, then ask a buddy, and then finally ask the teacher. The point is really about ensuring that all pupils, but particularly pupils with SLCN or who you are worried about, that they understand how to do that. They understand how to clarify their learning, how to clarify their understanding. It tends to be the most confident pupils, the most confident learners, actually those who need it least, who are the best at clarifying their learning. And we need to try and flip that. So actually it's those students that need it most who become most skilled, most confident to clarify and question. And as part of that, it's really important, just as with the idea of the video that I mentioned a moment ago, to not assume that pupils have understood the learning or understood what to do just because they've been told it or they've read it. Be curious about what your students have understood. Ask them to explain it to you or to explain it to a peer. Don't assume that they know what to do or assume that they've understood the vocabulary that they've heard. Really interesting example was from a pupil I was working with just this morning. We were talking through a scenario that had been in a story about somebody who had collapsed on the street, and he read about this person collapsing on the street, but he thought it meant this, that that's what they'd done. So being curious, exploring, not assuming that pupils know what to do. Ask them to explain to you, ask them to show you what they've got to do, help them to fill any gaps. My final strategy is a bit of a cheat really, because I'm just piggybacking off the Plain English campaign for written communication. My thinking is that there are lots of strategies out there that are suggested for making spoken language accessible. So avoiding figurative or idiomatic language, avoiding complex grammar, avoiding linked instructions, ensuring that stepped instructions are given in the order that you want them to happen. And they're all really valuable and they're all important, but I'm not sure that it's realistic for us to have all of these separate strategies in our head all the time while we're working with students. So instead, I like to think of having a plain English filter. Now that doesn't mean dumbing down. That doesn't mean avoiding complex ideas or discussions. That doesn't mean not using a rich vocabulary. What it does mean is thinking, am I explaining this in the most straightforward and accessible way that I can? Am I avoiding words that are unnecessarily obscure, unfamiliar or abstract? Grammar that is unnecessarily complex. As an example, as speech therapists, occasionally we're unfortunate enough to have to write a report for legal purposes, say for an educational tribunal. So we're effectively writing reports for judges, people who are highly qualified, highly skilled and experienced within their field. And they do not want reports that are full of our terminology, that are dense, that are difficult to read. They want accessible, clearly reasoned arguments that can be understood within the courtroom. And in the same way, your students want language to be accessible to them within the classroom. So to recap, key strategies for supporting pupils with SLCN, but that will also help all pupils. Provide time to process language and to respond. Provide opportunities for purposeful talk about learning within the classroom. Provide accessible visual support. Encourage and support students to clarify, to question, don't assume that they've understood. And finally, retrofit yourselves with a plain English filter to ensure that spoken language within the classroom is accessible to all. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found some of those ideas helpful.